dream. Don't live inside a dream. Inside a dream. Inside a dream.
Good afternoon. Hello. Hi in the back. I'm Kirsten Schaefer. I'm the Executive Director of Women in Film Los Angeles. Welcome. I want to start by thanking Stella Artois for hosting us in this beautiful space and being supporters of Women in Film. They're such amazing supporters that this year they produced these special chalices that have the Women in Film logo on them, as well as these gorgeous pins here, and you can purchase them. And when you purchase them, it supports all of the great programming that we do, helps us achieve gender parity in the entertainment industry. So please buy your chalice and your pin and take it home with you. I also want to give a quick shout out to the Sundance Film Festival, who are partners with us, and the Sundance Institute in particular, who are partnered with us around Reframe. We do this program together, and they welcome us here in their home in Park City. So thank you to Sundance. And then one final little announcement. You're going to hear a lot about the Reframe stamp today. We are currently counting the films from 2018 that are going to get the Reframe stamp, announced sometime in February with our partners at IMDb Pro. So please keep your eyes and ears open for the 2018 Reframe stamp recipients. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce today's panelists to you. It is moderated by Amanda Anduka from Deadline, and then Kathy Schulman, who is the co-founder of Reframe and also on the board of Women in Film. Nisha Ganatra directed Late Night, which premiered...
Big fan.
And Bruna Papandrea, who is also a Reframe ambassador and has 2 films in the festival this year. So thank you. Enjoy the panel.
Thank you, Kirsten. And thank you guys for being here. I'm so honored to get to do this again. And I'm so honored to also get to sit next to these some of the top filmmakers in the industry. And to carry on the discussion of as we strive to achieve gender parity in this industry. So without further ado, let's jump into it. I would like to start with asking you guys to maybe share an anecdote about a time where you kind of felt pushback from the male status quo and how you guys handled it. Kathy, we can start with you.
Well, maybe as an interesting segue into talking about the Reframe stamp, I'd like to tell a story that just happened last week.
Tell it, girl.
I could come up with another number of stories over the last 31 years, but I won't bore you. So I had a really interesting experience last week. So I was just finishing up a movie. It's called 5 Feet Apart. And we were in the very, very final mix. And as often happens, we were finally mixing the bit of score that was playing over the final crawl. And there I was on a big mixing stage with maybe about 16 or 18 people in the room. And at the end of my movie, the Reframe stamp came up, the red stamp, the actual thing right there on the screen. And really kind of collectively, everybody said, "What is that?" And I was like, "Does it protect animals?" And I'm like, "No, but it protects humans. How cool." Anyway, and you know, the stamp that you're going to hear more about today is an indication that the production was made in a gender-balanced way. But the reason I'm telling this story is that in that very moment, there was one other woman in the room, and she was our dialogue mixer. And it's the first time I've had a woman in a mixing room in my 31 years. And over the course of the last number of days, I had numerous times said to all the guys in the room, "Hey, do you guys hear that Melissa's talking?" She would talk and she'd not be heard. Or she'd say, "Hey, you guys, I can fix this in a second." Or, "You know what we could try?" And every single time, the entire room would speak over her. And she wouldn't get heard. And we would go through another half hour of various different things, you know, that we were trying to do to fix some kind of a problem. And the one person who had the solution couldn't get heard over all of those voices. And the reason I'm telling the story is that in that moment she said, "Wow, that is the coolest thing, that Reframe stamp. I want to be part of more movies that use that." And I said, "There's something even bigger for you to know, Melissa. You are the reason why it has the stamp. It's because you count. Because your number, you counted in this role, and because there were enough women to call this a gender-balanced production, that stamp is there." And I guess I just wanted to tell the story because it just shows the consistency of the unconscious version of the problem, which is a room like that, where we're all just coexisting, nobody's being mean to each other, but there's just that problem. There's not enough women in the room, and the women aren't being heard. So that's my story.
Great. And we'll talk more about the reframe stamp later, but I want to get the story from you too.
I'm trying to think of male pushback and
Or a challenge,
what you
maybe
can say,
challenged
but
by
what-
the status quo.
I mean, there was one thing that really struck me was I've been directing television, and sometimes, so I don't have a very loud voice naturally, so sometimes the AD will always like yell out action, or they'll echo you on set. And I noted one time when I was directing an episode, I yelled action, and it happens every time now. Some women on the set froze and turned to see where that voice was coming from. And every time I direct an episode, somebody comes to me and says, that's the first time I've heard a female voice say the word action. And that is stunning for 2019. But now I make it a point, especially if there's a male AD, to say, no, I'm going to yell action just because, sadly, it's a political act just to do so. Because the more people get used to hearing women's voices saying action and cut, the more it will be a norm.
I don't know if I have an anecdote. I'm kind of being serious because I think I realized I honed my craft in Australia, where actually there were quite a few female producers, and because we didn't have this big industry, it's one of the reasons, not wanting to kind of work for the white male patriarchy, that I have really had my own companies for most of my career. So I tend to just kind of curate and choose who I work with, and I choose not to work with those people, and choose to kind of, create environments where, those kind of biases. But I too have been in Kathy's position many times where on a conference call, you'll just, I've heard men on conference calls say, oh, hey, great to see you, John, David, Steve, and there's two women on the phone, they don't name them. And I'm like, and what about, so we encounter that kind of daily. But for the most part, I've stayed away from them.
So let's just touch on the current state of this industry, particularly when it comes to women in behind the camera roles. We see the numbers are they're going up very slowly and incrementally, but they are going up. How do you kind of maintain an optimistic outlook of the future of females in this, and particularly, like I said, behind the camera roles?
Down the line again?
Whoever wants to
Very polite females.
right?
We're very polite females, aren't we? We're like,
I'm not polite, Kathy.
who goes
Not.
next?
Whoever, there's no particular order. Whoever wants to take it.
Well, I mean, I think what we're starting to feel is that the work is working. So there was never a solution that was going to happen by screaming and yelling about it. It all comes down to how we can programmatically and systemically change this culture. And I think, I think that the movement has turned that way now, and that a number of organizations, including the ones involved here today and others, and now intersecting with companies, are starting to understand the importance of trying to cure the problem from the top down. I mean, that's one thing we definitely have seen, that, we really haven't had a lot of luck. I've been involved in this for about 20 years, but we really haven't had a huge amount of luck trying from the bottom up. So what you really have to do is start changing culture and making people be aware of, what it is that's endemic and causing the repetitive exclusion of women. And so I think we're just starting to penetrate. So I find, and we should talk about the Reframe program and stuff in a minute, because I do think it's the best one. But no, I mean, I know, I was introduced as co-founding it. That wasn't the point. But what I meant was, I just realized how arrogant that sounded. But what I meant was, I think it's a really, really, really creatively good, strong way to do it. And I think what we have to do is find our motivation in continuing the work. I do firmly believe that if we stop for a minute, it will have been a moment and it'll get swept right back under the rug. I don't think that we've created lasting change. I don't think we're close. And so it's really in the work, and also bringing other people into the cause, particularly men.
I stay positive by seeing all the women who are in the workforce now, like just agencies. There are young women who are taking on female clients and taking on people of color and helping sort of just become the first person to say, this person is worth representation. Now this person is worth getting work, and I'm going to just do that by presenting them to you as a viable artist that you should hire. And then when I go into feature studios and go into rooms now, there are more and more women. Sometimes I'll go into a meeting and it will be all women in the room, and that is still something I'm just now experiencing. And there is this kind of feeling of the door closes and there's like, okay, how are we going to do this? We're going to get this. We're going to make this happen. And just seeing more women in the roles of power where they can hire women, and the fact that they are now doing it. There was this sense of, well, I got in, I'm a woman. There was one seat at the table and it's me, and God knows nobody else can get in behind me because that threatens my position. And that sort of thinking has gone away. And it's now, oh my gosh, it's my responsibility, and it will be better for everyone if I can get more women in and more people at the table. And I think that's the change in culture that is really going to help have lasting effect.
I just want to. How do you think we can build on that type of community and having us, instead of like you said, I can be the only person. How do we kind of use our togetherness as our advantage?
I mean, sadly, I think it was when the Equal Employment Opportunity, the EEOC brought this like lawsuit against people saying, hey, it's actually illegal for you to not include women and people of color, that you can't keep doing this. And it was it was interesting just anecdotally, me and other women who were having a longer journey to break in, I think there was this feeling of, oh, maybe I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe I can't get it. Maybe I shouldn't be doing that. And when the statistics came forward, the work you're doing to just tell us like, hey, it's not just you. It was actually a systemic thing against all women, and it wasn't in your head, and it wasn't you not being able to break through. There was an active wall against you getting in. That really helped you feel like, oh, okay, it didn't have to do with my talent or my ability. It had to do with something bigger. And now we can sort of acknowledge that and start breaking that down. And just women supporting each other is the thing, right? It is the fact that you sort of have to realize that was always a lie. It was never this zero-sum game. There was never only one seat at the table. It was just a lie created by everyone who was in power to keep themselves in power. And once I think that sort of wall fell down of, oh, this was never true. There was always room at the table for more. That's what's changing things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very optimistic because, I choose to live my life like that. But I do agree with Kathy. I think the problem is systemic, and I think we are at the beginning of change. I mean, Sundance is a great example, right? So I made a movie with a female director this year called The Nightingale, and we went to Venice, and we were the only woman in competition, and it was terrible. It was awful for her because that's all people talked about. You're the only woman. They weren't talking about the film. They were focused on you're the only woman. And then you come to Sundance, and 42%, I think, of the movies are directed by women, and it's a celebration. Yeah. And they're talking about the fucking movies, which is what we should be talking about, right? And you can hear the Venice programmers, God love Venice, but he's like, whoa, we chose from the movies, the filmmakers. And of course, you don't become the Coen brothers without being Nisha Ganatra, getting Sundance exposure, having people discover you, and that's how you make the Coen brothers, the Alfonso Cuarons. Those festivals, and this is a big part of Reframe, we can talk about initiative later, is bringing those directors into the light, because when they're in the light will shine and they will get discovered. So I'm optimistic being at this festival, but I have to say it was an incredibly disheartening to be at Venice and to see how far we haven't come in certain parts of the world.
And I also think, can I say one thing? Because I think one thing that Bruna and I share, we both have female-facing companies, and, and Bruna's been at it even longer than me in terms of being very specific about that. But what that underlines is a belief in the marketplace. And I just wanted to add that, because the truth is that the female and diverse marketplace is much, much bigger than the male marketplace right now. We're now over 70% of the buyers of all filmed content are women, and there's also something to be said for it isn't a bad idea for your product to match the buyer. Every other industry in the world does that. Looks at who am I delivering the product for that actually wants to buy it and tries to actually make a match. And so one of the interesting things is that if you can find the courage and the confidence to keep reminding people that you are also doing something that will make money, it can
that
be super.
Seems to be making the most impact too. When you realize, oh, it's more profitable.
It's more It's turning out to. I mean, we'll see. We're actually, Reframe is about to, commence a big study. Well, we're in the middle actually of a big. Study about exactly this. We're trying to absolutely, specifically, algorithmically figure out, given all of the different release dates and marketing budgets and other kinds of impact factors that have to do with how a movie performs, is it or is it not true that women's content designed for a female audience first does in fact make as much money or more money than that designed for a male audience? I mean, I can tell you that if we had to guess now based on what we know, we can see that the female content is stronger. But we certainly can't announce that until it's true, you know, through the math. But that's a really, really big motivator. And it's just hard to stick with it because you have to work really hard to prove everything and not take a job working for some guy who's going to abuse you, which is what I usually want to do when I'm having a bad day.
I mean, we have this late night, you know, the two stars are, one is a woman over 50 and the other is a woman of color. And you know, there was an incredible amount of pressure of this kind of movie. Will it make money? Will there be an audience? How dare you? How dare you?
Female comedy with people over 40?
Yes, I don't know what's going to happen. And then it's kind of radical that it broke records. It broke the record for the highest sale at Sundance. Right? That's amazing.
Congratulations.
But that is the content that broke that record, and that's amazing. And sadly,
that proves the marketing. That proves the economic point.
That's the proof. That's scientific, right?
Yeah. I think that's scientific. Clearly. Whatever happened in the middle of the night, I don't know. It was super scientific.
It's crazy to think that we're still having these discussions to this day. But I wanted to ask you guys, what are some of the barriers that female filmmakers are experiencing when it comes to getting their films from festivals to studios or to these distribution companies? What are some of those barriers?
I mean, just getting them funded, right? Because there is this pervasive myth that those movies, will they be profitable? They're risky. But they're not, as Kathy's pointing out. They're absolutely, why is our industry so slow to market to the people who are consuming it? I don't know.
It's like some kind of like mythological bias, you know? It's like sometimes you just believe something and keep believing it if you keep saying it, but it's not true. And very outdated models. I mean, one thing I know, you know, having worked as a studio president and stuff, is that what really, really surprised me was that when I would sort of march down the hall when we were deciding on a movie to finance, you know, I would get these models from the finance. You know, there's a finance department at all these companies, and they do a bunch of math to show a P&L to see how it's going to perform. And, you know, that only works as well as the information that's put into the model. It's essentially like a machine that you're putting the facts into. And there would be all these facts about like how women's content works overseas in various countries, or how people of color perform or whatever. And then I would look at where these numbers came from, and they would be 20 and 22 years old, these facts, or 25 years old. And it was like, well, wait a minute, if you put in a bunch of ingredients, you know, check. So we needed an ambassador program. What we decided is we needed to have influential people come together to go talk to these companies with that sort of sense of risk that if you don't do this, we're not going to do business with you. And so what we did is we put together 50 industry leaders, and you really had to be that. You had to be a president of a company or an owner of an agency or the head of a guild or whatever you were going to be, or a very well-known filmmaker or whatever. And so we put those people together, and the concept was that once we put this plan, once we figure out what we're going to do, we're going to go in and talk to them, and they're going to have to take the meeting, because if they don't, guess what? We don't want to have our company at your company anymore. So we had a little leveraging point. In the end of the day, to finish my 3 minutes, we were able to take over 60,000 data points over the course of the various different research studies we did and put them under 3 categories. And we realized that we were dealing with basically a triangle of problems. And like many systemic cultural problems, it tends to be that things, when they lean against each other, unless you fix all the sides of it, it's kind of a collapse. And on the one side, we had culture problems. There was all these things having to do with the biases happening in companies that would, you know, trickle down to these very male-centric kinds of products, right? And not to mention unsafe work environment and all those kinds of things. On the other side, we had lack of pipeline. Where are the women? If they're there, why aren't we seeing them or supporting them, or why aren't they there in the first place? And at the bottom, at the base, and most importantly, and I've already talked about this today, was how can we prove what the marketplace truly is, so that people can understand that if you were to do this, you wouldn't lose your shirt. And then we addressed these 3 sides of the triangle with programmatic ideas that we could bring to financiers of content of any type to start working on. And there were various different things for each of the different sides. And just to keep this short, what we're really focused on today is, you know, how could we start to deal with this marketplace issue? And it kind of deals with pipeline too, but really marketplace. And the first step was in fact the reframe stamp. And the reframe stamp is essentially a recognition that the way that the content was made, both in front and behind the camera, did achieve gender parity. And there's a mechanism. We are partnered with IMDb, I think Kirsten mentioned that, and there's a mechanism with which all the information on any given piece of content can be put through this tool, and out comes a reaction, out comes a realization it was or it wasn't. And if it was, the stamp, you know, can be used on our websites, can be used on the films as it's just starting to permeate, can be used in marketing. And the concept behind it is that we want consumers, as we get into sort of the B2C or business to consumer part of this, what we're really trying to do is have people realize, I do care what I'm seeing and how it was made, in the same way that you do care, many of you probably, whether your food is organic or not, whether there was slavery involved in making something you're purchasing, you know, kind of origins and kind of understanding what it is that we consume and buy. And so the idea here was to start to do that. And frankly, there was a very negative reaction at the beginning. The studios and networks and things were like, you must be high on crack. Why would we tell people how we do things? And I think I added the high on crack myself. But anyway, yeah, so it was like that. But as usual, as soon as someone starts to get an A on the wall or a stamp on the movie, guess what everybody wants? Stamp on the movie. And so that was the point. Who cares that they're all being competitive like lemmings and want a stamp? If they have to get the stamp, they have to do the thing, right? So who cares about it's the thing? Do it. Make your piece of content gender, fair. And then it comes down to the executives and the producers and things on that piece of content, and then the department heads, and all the way down as it trickles to really take a look. And what does that do? Build the pipeline. And what does that do? Put more people into the system. That fixes the culture. So that's really the origin of the stamp, and a little bit of an overview of Reframe. And all the materials about it are available on both the Sundance and Women in Film and Reframe websites.
Anisha, so your film actually has the stamp at the end credits. Have you received any feedback on that? Are people asking you like about it?
It was the first question at our Q&A on Friday night at the world premiere.
Wow.
Yeah, somebody said, what is that stamp and what does it mean?
Was it somebody from the public, do you think, or a professional person?
Was it a plant?
Kathy.
Did you plant? It was Kathy.
We talked about this beforehand, not outing me.
And then for Bruna and Nisha, like, is this because you guys are known for working with women? I mean, it's never been a thing that's been pointed out. Yeah. Is that something that you kind of sought out to do organically when you first began? Or sorry, did it happen organically? Starting out in your careers, is that something you had to seek out to do?
When I did my first film, I did an indie film called Chutney Popcorn, and when I was trying to get the crew, it was very important to me to have female heads of departments, and it was just from my own sense of, wow, why aren't there any, and what are we doing? And I'm making my first indie film, so I can just do that and hire them. And then it sort of felt like, to me, when I was seeing people's resumes, they all got to a point where it stopped, and this was based on just me in film school at like 23 going, hey, how come this woman's gaffed a million movies but no one's let her DP? And how come this person's been in electric but no one's let her gaff? And so I kind of just did my own affirmative action program and said, I'm just gonna bump everyone up. I'm giving myself the opportunity to direct for the first time, so I'm gonna let everybody else have their first chance doing their first thing. And so I thought that was a way to kind of perpetuate work for women that now, because all of them were saying, well, I've never done it, so no one will let me do it. So then I thought, well, now you can say you're the DP of Chutney Popcorn and go do other things. And you can say you did this. And we all just kind of just raised each other up. And that was just my naive way of doing it. So now that I'm working in the industry, I get to say to the line producer, hey, make sure you hire women, and let's make sure there are women in every department and people of color in every department, and let's make sure everyone doesn't just do the easy thing and call the same 5 people they always work with. You have to take a chance, and myself included. I sort of realized that, all of the, especially cinematographers, the reels that you get, you'll be watching them, and then the one from the female cinematographer will come through, and it'll have web series or a lot shot on video or something different, and you have to think like you're not comparing apples to apples. You can't judge them the same way because this woman didn't get the opportunity for that equipment and that, that kind of stuff. So I met with this one DP who's, I said, hey, you shot this movie, but the lighting was a little off in some scenes. And I found out from her that she basically had a bounce board and some foil to light the whole movie, and that was it. And so then when I found out she did this incredible job with 2 pieces of equipment, when all of these guys whose reels are being viewed, I just had to hire her because she never had the chance. And if you just think, about what resources the woman whose stuff you're watching is. If people watched my indie film the same way they watched, Kevin Smith's indie film, or the same way they watch, it's going to be a different audience. You have to sort of open your mind a little more and think about what was involved in the making of it and how can I help this person if they have the talent and the drive to rise up to the next level.
I agree with all of that, and it's true. Obviously, I did start a company. 7 years ago. It was really more about, I'll be honest, it wasn't about women behind the camera. It was really more about women in front of the camera because I wanted women at the center of stories. And in my next incarnation, my new company, we say we have to do either or thing and hopefully both. And you do have to bring consciousness to it. It's not like when we make a list, we consciously put mostly women on it. Yeah. And to Nisha's point, and by the way, I will still work with male directors. I have a lot of relationships with male directors, but I just made a movie with Noah Hawley, and we consciously hired every single head of department as a woman to find the balance. So we will get the reframe stamp, and it's a movie with women at the center. But, it is really important. You can't just stop thinking about it. You have to bring consciousness. We're just, won't change if we don't. And to Nisha's point, which is such a good one, and, even our DP, she didn't, it was a big break for her. But and he could have hired the more experienced guy. It would have been very easy for him to do that, but he chose not to, and we chose not to, because that's the way she does become, the next Bob Ellis. I mean, that's how it happens, and so it's very important to consciously make those choices.
Yeah, I'm curious what kind of research is going into this stamp program and how far you can take it. And I guess what comes to mind is, the Oscars, the nominations were read recently, and we're not going to have there's no female directors. The below the line categories, I think there was like 25% out of the 121 nominees, or maybe like 53 were female, or something low, like 200 and something. I'm sorry. Do you see this stamp being extended to maybe the awards voters or just different types of industry? Do you see that being something that could happen?
I hope so. I mean, there's nothing we don't want to do with this stamp. Allison Amelia, who's over here, should raise her hand. You can talk to her about it later. She runs this program, and we want to, wherever it can be useful to make change, it should go. And it's funny. I mean, the reality is the hardest places to infiltrate as it regards the entire change programs that we're working with and other people we're working with are the most established places. Frankly, the biggest, most old-fashioned studios is where there's the most resistance, the Academy. Like, in the sense that, to really, really force these older institutions, if not force, what I really mean is to make them understand the importance, it's still remote. It's remote, and I don't know why it's remote. There's many people in these places who understand it, but there's like some kind of like seed at the end, like deeply rooted seed that we're still having trouble, digging out.
Even just the practical, like with the Academy, it was interesting because if you make a film and it gets released, you can qualify to join the Academy. And I remember when I made my first film, I got this piece of paper, and I was like, oh wow, and I filled it all out, and then it said, now to join, all you need is 2 members of the Academy in your category to sign and endorse you. And I was like, how am I ever going to know anyone in the Academy? And I tossed it, just didn't even think about it. But when you think now, like, oh, if that's the entry in, who's going to get in except for each other?
It's true, and it's not even that if you make or win, it's not an entrance to the Academy. I'm not trying to say, I'm just saying that, like, this is where it really proves the point that where the entrenchment is super, super deep, it is hard to get in there, you know, and it may be partly that it has to kind of grow out of itself.
But, yeah, and I think to your point, I mean, I know, Alison, and we've talked about this, and I'm on the PGA board, and we do need to have partnerships with these organisations. It's essential. We need a partnership with the PGA. We need a partnership with the DGA. I mean, and I'm going to go public here and say it. Like, it's one thing. It's enough that there was no DGA nominee who was a woman, but to have not one woman who was a breakthrough director, I'm sorry, but it's appalling. It's appalling.
Anyone
That's
saw
again
Karen
like
Kusama's movie.
yeah.
When I saw Destroyer, I was blown
What about
away.
Deborah Granick? A lot about
Deborah Granick.
I mean, just in the breakthrough. Okay,
Can
so
you ever
yes,
forgive me?
it is.
I mean,
there is
these
a
are-
swell of movies that come through the Academy. Okay, and that's a pipeline. There is a pipeline issue there, right? But to not bring a woman into the light in the breakthrough character, where people like Jennifer Kent, that's the reason they have thrived in their careers because of being on those lists. And that, to me, it's a problem, and the DGA needs to look at that, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So yes, I do think it's essential, but we have to go hand
We
in
do
hand
already
with
have a partnership with the PGA, right? Yeah, we have a PGA partnership, and we're working on the. and we're
Sorry,
in the middle of
DGA,
a.
I'm sorry
We're in the
to
middle
not
of the Writers Guild, and we
We all should do better.
need to do. We have the Writers Guild in, sorry, and we're working. And we're working on the DGA.
Not anymore. I've just
Nobody's
killed
giving-
that
nobody-
deal.
nobody-
I've killed
nobody's
it.
telling
I've
me anything
destroyed it. They're never speaking to Reframe again. No.
I'm
So,
in the DGA.
I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions, but before we toss it to them, how do you feel like this stamp can address the so when it comes to female filmmakers, people of color, people in the LGBTQ community, people in the disabled community, those numbers get smaller and smaller. How do you think that the stamp can kind of address that issue?
Well, the stamp does actually in it and in the computation, there's additional points for additional diversities. As ridiculous as that sounds, I realize I feel like I'm putting ingredients into a soup, but that was after the milkshake. But it really is true. So the whole plan, it's all intersectional, the stamp. And so what we've done is we've tried to work that out through the numbers so that each of these different things, you get additional points. I don't know if disabilities is a calculation.
No, because there has to be a way to count it, so people have to self-identify as disabled to be able to.
She's saying that people would have to self-identify. I mean, one thing we did run into, although we're getting around it now, was that, obviously companies are being taught and there's certain laws around not asking people to disclose certain things, about their identity, sexual identity, ethnicity, et cetera. And then we need it disclosed to be able to count. So, but we're working through those issues now. And we are very, very focused on absolute intersectional diversity.
Okay. We have questions. I'm going to go here, and then I'll go to you next. Go ahead.
Hi. First of all, Nisha, I met you about 4 years ago. My daughter was for Shameless, and I have to just say you were a wonderful, wonderful director. Very well. It was lovely to meet you, and we connected. But you said action. It was good. But my question is that I start shooting my next feature in May. It's $3 million. I'm very excited about it, and I'm directing this, and I'm not part of the production side. So what help and support can I get in order to say to my male producers, because I've tried to already get them my female UPM, I've introduced them to somebody I'd like to work with. What can I do that's not just me on my own trying to break this?
It is just you on your own trying to break this. You just have to keep breaking it. It's really hard work, and you feel so exhausted, like you're repeating the same thing. But I remember Gloria Steinem saying, I just had to repeat myself for decades. She just said, a woman without a bike is like if a woman without a man is like a fish without a bicycle. It was just, she just said it over and over and over and over. A woman without a bike or something like that. Yeah, like she just, but it is, you have to, there are so many allies, there are so many great men who are feminists who will help you, but you have to put it forward and you have to say, I need this to do my best work.
And one thing I would add that I've been asking directors to think about, and they've been doing it, is tell your financier or your distributor, if you have one, that you want to achieve this stamp from the beginning. You, the director, I care that my movie has this stamp. So I may not be running this production, but you, as the financier / distributor, need to make sure that the production is one in a way that I don't later get, you can use it this way, blamed for not having been shown gender parity when it was my agenda, but I just wasn't in charge. So we do ask the directors to speak directly to the financiers.
Yes, as a consumer wanting to see a film with a stamp and gender parity, how do you find that?
How does she find
Oh, how does she find it? Yeah. So right now, you would go to our website or you'd go to IMDb. But I guess that's a good question if you're a consumer that doesn't know that you need to go to IMDb or the website. Do you want to answer that? Yeah. Hello, my dear. You used to be my assistant. No.
It is true.
Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Matt Cuman. I'm with IMDb, and I'm the general manager for IMDb Pro. We're really pleased to be partnered with Reframe, and you can go to imdb.com/reframe, and all the winners and the stamps are available through that. And we're looking for ways. It's really important to shine a spotlight, as you said, and make the discovery of this content and the people behind it more known. So that's what we're focused on doing.
So I guess what we'll be working on is the marketing from the IMDb side through the marketing from IMDb to consumer, and also on the various sites for the movies. I mean, obviously, what we're trying to do, like on all the movie sites that are using it now, is make sure it's all over the site, so that if a person goes to see something about a movie or it reaches them through any of the traditional channels, we're trying to reach them anyway to let them know the movie even exists. That when they find out the movie exists, they also find out that it's got the stamp.
I actually want to ask you guys that. Yeah, the whole inclusion rider and it being the top of the conversation. Have you guys seen any kind of meaningful change that came from it?
Are we talking about harassment issues now, or are we talking about inclusion?
Inclusion, yeah, the inclusion.
Okay, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I think anyone who speaks out and talks about it firstly, it's just inspirational, right? So if you can inspire others to think about it, and just like Frances McDormand did, last year, I do think it's really helping. I think it's a big part of a conversation, and all helps bring consciousness. I think the inclusion rider is something we are very conscious of now. I think one of the things that people don't quite understand about the inclusion rider, and again, this is systemic, right? There are a lot of roles on a set that I cannot control, right? There are teamsters that are mostly men. That makes up a lot of our crew. So there's, again, systemic change that still needs to happen. I don't think it's as easy as saying, oh, well, we can guarantee 50%, because we don't control some of those decisions. But we need to work out how we can change, those organizations, talk to the unions, team up with the unions. So it's a very important conversation. It's a really
and it can be really hard. I mean, I was working on a movie it's the same one that did get the stamp in the end, but we were in New Orleans, and it was really hard. We were all committed to doing it, and we just couldn't get the crew, and we just we were struggling like crazy. We were starting to collect resumes from people who were still students. It was getting kind of ridiculous. But there is this whole pipeline. But yes, speaking out is important, no question about it. And the specificity of what people are asking for, I think, is.
And then second to the reframe stamp was if Amazon is a partner, and I think maybe IMDb, maybe they could stamp, since everybody looks up their movies on Amazon, maybe they could get involved in stamping.
You mean stamp content that they buy versus content that they make?
Yeah.
Have it be a category.
Somebody searching for movies, like what you're saying, consumers searching for movies.
Things you may like a category suggested for you. Yeah.
Great idea. And yes, we do have resources, both Reframe and Women in Film particularly.
There's some people, put your hand up if you have a resource for women. I see Jen McGowan, Westfield Howard over there. Did I see Destry in here? There's different lists.
But yes, and then on the websites, and we're working on, we continue to work on the importance of making those lists. And apparently Bruna has really good lists, so you should call her.
just publish your
Everyone
list.
just email me. No. No, but it is essential, and I know Alison's working on that to create a real resource. It's a great question. Who are all the female DPs? Who are all the design? It's a great question.
It'd be
It's-
nice to know where
essential.
they live too, right? I'm like, could someone put if they're New York or LA based? Yeah.
The other thing, though, is there are so many. There's so many talented women who can do these jobs and have been doing them. I don't know why people act like it's so hard to find them because there are so many of them. They just need a chance.
They're hiding, Nisha. They're hiding.
I know why. It's a time issue. I think I know why. I think because when you're mounting a production, which we've all done, and you quickly are putting all your departments together, yeah, it's easier. And maybe you meet 2 people or 3, or maybe you call someone you worked with before. It really
Just
is
general laziness.
It's like a general laziness or like just pace. Like you have to really stop, and put them through. And you have to be careful not to let people, underlings, like try to do it and then not listen to what they recommend. That's another whole problem. That happens at the studios a lot. That the under levels, I mean that, like the support levels, they do identify a lot of good creatives who are diverse people. And then when it comes down to that studio head saying, but I'm only going to take 2 meetings in the end with who's going to direct this movie, and they look at the pile of resumes, and it happens right there again. It just doesn't it doesn't like go all the way up. So you got to like really push it up the chain.
So Stella's Film Lounge they're recognizing meaningful moments of film. So my question to you 3 ladies, just to wrap this up, can you recall a meaningful moment that you experienced early on in your career that got you to where you are today?
A million. I guess my first day on set, I walked onto a set, somebody handed me a call sheet, I didn't know what it was. And I saw somebody across the room that was, I thought, probably the director, and I said, is that person the director? And it was Catherine Bigelow doing her second movie. And I was like, oh, I'll just do that. I don't want to do this whole assisting thing, seems so dumb. I like went to college, why do I have to get coffee? So I was like immediately sure that I should be working over there in that chair, so that was fun for me. Yeah. I never worked with another female director, by the way, it took me another 13 years to work with a female director.
I'm going next, apparently. Yeah, I mean, I had a very defining moment that changed my life. I was quite young, and I met Anthony Minghella, the late great filmmaker Anthony Minghella. And I'd made one little movie in Australia, and I met him at a film festival. See, go film festivals. And he was like, you should come to London, see me. And I was like, okay. And I happened to go to the London Film Festival, so I went and saw him. And he was looking for someone to run his company in London. I was like, oh, it's not going to be me. And he did. I got that job working for he and Sydney Pollack, and I was 29. And I said to him years later, I was like, why did you hire me? Like, there were all these experienced people. And he was like, well, I thought you were smart and that, we would have fun. But essentially, I think, it goes back to, like, what I feel generally. It's like, firstly, you can kind of do anything, but, like, it just listen to your instincts, and it is about people and kind of connections and not necessarily about what's on your resume, right? Because I hadn't done anything. And he was also a great supporter of female filmmakers. And really, so that's really where I found my love for putting women in front of the camera, was working with him, a man. Yeah. And so, yeah, that was my big defining.
I think for me, I made my first independent film and then was trying very hard to break into television where all my friends sort of had gone in and started working. And I was in that catch-22 of nobody would let me direct an episode of television because I hadn't directed an episode of television. So I kept getting offered shadow things or do this diversity program or do this other diversity program and then do this shadow program. And it just kept going. And finally, I met Jill Soloway, who was doing a small show called Transparent on Amazon that nobody cared about at the time and nobody knew what was happening. And she said, I actually don't want somebody with a lot of TV credits. I'm looking for an independent filmmaker who can help make this something different. And that one person saying, you don't have to have done it to do it. Come do it with me and we'll do this together. And we directed the entire first season together. And that just sort of broke open many, many, many barriers.
You ladies are inspiring. Thank you so much for doing this. I hope this conversation was as meaningful to you guys as it was to us. And thank you guys for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.